Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and thank you for the ability to gather together as families over Thanksgiving. Be with us this new Advent season, that we remember what you gave us in your Son, Jesus Christ. Help us to focus on him during this season of Lent and for Christmas. Bless this day and be with us all. Amen. Now, all yours, Hillary.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for having me. Yes, we were talking about how apparently I'm a low talker, so I'm gonna, if you can't hear me so well, let me know. I think this is a really good time of year to talk about agriculture. We think of it traditionally as sort of harvest season, and harvest is coming to an end. But of course, we also have a lot of commodities and industries here in Chester County that are year-round. So we're going to run through a little bit of this. I wanted to kind of cover a couple things today. We're going to talk about the background of ag and sort of the economic components of it for the county. Talk about how it's part of our sense of place. I think we all kind of acknowledge and recognize that when we drive around. We're going to talk just a little bit about technology and innovation. And then I have a little video which is going to just introduce you really quickly to some of the folks that farm in Chester County. I think it's always kind of fun to see who's out there doing this work, and sometimes it's surprising. And then we're going to just talk really quickly about how you can all help support the local industry and keep agriculture thriving in our county. So how many of you are familiar a little bit with ag? Grandparents have a farm, right? Okay, so a lot of you. I really would love this to be interactive. So if you have questions or thoughts or comments, jump in, let me know. Particularly in the beginning, I'm going to give you a lot of facts, a lot of data. So to try not to make that super dry, like I said, ask questions, jump in. Did you know that Chester County in the Piedmont region has some of the best soils in the world? Yes, some of you do know that. So, and Lancaster, exactly right. So we talked a minute ago when Craig was doing the introduction about how a lot of the county is sort of like a suburban, center and that type of thing. So we grow houses really well here, right? As well as crops. That's a little bit of that tension, right? So one of the things that is important is really kind of keeping not just the soils and land preservation going, but the industry, because the industry, if it's thriving, is a fabulous way of protecting agricultural land and soils. So I want to give you a little bit of background and perspective. Now, this is all from the 2017 Ag Census. So they'll be starting the next Ag Census. They'll start doing it next year. It'll probably be around spring of 2023 when the new stuff comes out. So it's a little bit dated, but this is the best information we have currently. So I thought it would be helpful to give you a little bit of perspective about not just Chester County, but what is around us. Some of these obviously are in the Philadelphia metropolitan region, and then Lancaster is not, Berks is not. So, it's kind of spanning both of those areas. But if you look at Lancaster, so there's over 5,000 farms, right? And so for value of ag products sold, it's over $1.5 billion. That's just direct sales. That's not an indirect economic component to the larger, industry. Chester County ranks second in the state of Pennsylvania. We have almost $750 million in value sold. We are higher than Berks. We are higher than everyone except for Lancaster. that surprises a lot of people, right? Because they drive around and they're like, all I see is subdivision. I see subdivision and parks and X, Y, and Z, but they're not necessarily. They see dairy, they may see field crops, but it's a larger component of what agriculture is in Chester County. Anyone have any thoughts on this slide? Was anyone surprised a little bit?
How much of that is mushroom? Yeah,
that is a great question. That is a great question. I have all that broken out so you can see that. A significant amount, over half a billion is mushroom. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a little bit of statistic from the 2012 to 2017 census. You see farmland is continuing to go down. There was a little bit of a slow between the 2007 and the 2012 census. In part, that was because a lot of development stopped with the compression and recession. So it did pick up a little bit. We lost a few farms, but we still have about 1,650. So we have about 150,000 acres in farms. Again, we're losing some of that, which is not a shock to anyone in the room, as we have continued development and development pressure. So farmland accounting for 31% of farmland in Chester County. Again, a little bit on the decline, but still significant. Average size of farm was 91 acres. And we had someone that asked me earlier about Amish, and about half of our farming population is Amish, and they generally do tend to farm on a smaller scale acreage. And so I think we're going to continue to see some of that decline in terms of size, but probably won't go too far down. This is an interesting category that was new to the 2017 census. I'll have a slide later on where I'll show you, it's the inset of our local farm products guide. When Craig and I first started talking about me coming today, we were talking about I think you had seen the farm guide, and it had said the 125 farms, whatever, selling direct. We have a lot of farms that have started selling direct. So this is a new category for Ag Census, and they're putting it at 210 farms, about 13%. So the rest are selling on the commodity market. People ask me a lot about organic farming and what is that all about? And there's a lot of, I think, myth and mystique about organic farming. The reality is we don't have that many organic farms. We have probably today we have more than 43, but in Ag Census terms, it's a fairly small percent. You can see that, but it is a sector that's increasing, and I think you can see from the sales numbers that it's significantly increasing on a per farm basis. And in large part, those organic farmers are selling direct to consumers, so they can set the price. So they have the tendency, they can keep that increase going. And also, if they are selling on the commodity market, they are earning a higher profit margin.
So, Larry, question.
Sure.
Do you include land from natural lands and Brandywine Conservancy that is leased to farmers as part of the agricultural land?
Yes. Yes. And again, I have a slide on that that we'll talk about in a little bit, because yes, it's important to recognize that whenever the county is talking about land preservation, the number that they give an annual number, and I have that all in here, so we'll get to that in a minute. But it is it's the efforts of municipalities, it's the land trusts, it's all of those factors together. It's not just the county ag land preservation program. That is definitely an important point to remember. But The average age of farmers in Pennsylvania is 56. It's actually 54 in Chester County. It's a little bit lower. We have 25% of the producers are new and beginning, which is great. We want to keep that number going up. 25% is good, but it's not gonna, it's not gonna fill in as people rotate out with retirement. The new and beginning definition is under 10 years in production. So there are a lot of different groups where they talk about young farmers, but of course, they're not necessarily all young in terms of chronological age. These could be folks that have had a career and then go into agriculture as a second career. But if they're under that 10-year threshold, they would still be considered new and beginning. So let's see. We had talked about this when I showed you the graph with all the regional statistics. We are second in the state of Pennsylvania for value, and we are 53rd nationally out of 3,000 counties. That's a shock to a lot of people. One really interesting thing, and this is going to touch on mushrooms. If you look at the value per acre, we are 18th nationally. So what I'm saying with that is when you take our almost $750 million production value and you divide that through the 150 acres or 150,000 acres, you get this sort of 4,733 figure. Now, of course, you have counties, like let's use California, where they generate billions of dollars in an agricultural product. It could be raisins, it could be almonds, it could be wine grapes, whatever it is. But there's over 1 million acres of land to get that level of production, right? So I think it's really interesting when you look at sort of the footprint that generates the value for Chester County. And a lot of that is because it's indoor and it's due to the mushroom industry.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And do these numbers include cattle raising, hog raising, chickens, and all that? So it is animals, not just plants.
Yeah, yes.
Excuse me, would you repeat the questions? I got to note that they don't hear the questions so well.
Yes, I can absolutely do that. Thank you. Yeah, so for anything that's to do with land, it's considering livestock, it's considering field crop, it's all of that. We're going to go through some of these commodity rankings now. Again, this can get a little dry, so I don't want to go too quickly to confuse matters, but hopefully you'll see some of the figures and it'll answer some of your questions about livestock and what that impact is. So Chester County is actually ranked first in Pennsylvania for crop production, which I think most people are even shocked that we beat Lancaster. They're like, how on earth is that possible? And that's because Lancaster has a significant amount of livestock. So a lot of people who have livestock here in Chester County are, and also in Lancaster, but they are also growing field crops for feed. So they're kind of doing both. So they may have a dairy, and then to offset cost, instead of bringing in all of that feed, they're growing their own field crops. So we are number one. Here's your point about mushrooms that was asked earlier. So that total, that 570 is all the horticulture, and then the 450, 378 is mushroom. So 80% of Chester County ag is mushroom. Wow. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Over half of the nation's mushrooms are grown in Chester County. And we sort of tack on Georgia, which is just over the line in Berks County. kind of pull them down a little bit too. Okay, so this is sort of what I was just saying. We're ranked first in Pennsylvania and third in the US for nursery, greenhouse, floriculture, sod, and mushroom. So mushroom is part of that horticulture figure. And that's where, again, it's that 450. So for the horticulture figure, mushroom is almost 90% of that, whereas it's a total of about 80% for the larger ag picture. Hampshire. We are second in PA for value of horses. We are 5th in dairy. Here's an interesting thing. So I would get call after call because I think most people know that over the last couple of years, dairy has been kind of in a downward spiral. There's been a lot of talk and discussion about the dairy industry. The dairy industry actually has grown in Chester County instead of declined, which is a really, I think it's mostly attributed to Amish. But it is interesting because a lot of areas, particularly in the state of Pennsylvania, are hard hit, and New York and some of these other places. So I think it's pretty good that we haven't lost any dairy. We are 7th in vegetable and melon potato production. It's a small chunk of what we do, but we're still relatively high in it. So we had 154 farms involved in those. And all of that is a growing sector. And we are 12th in fruits, tree nuts, and berries. Again, it's generally a small number, but it's still significant in terms of the overall production. Again, it's a continuing growing sector. 14th in cultivated Christmas trees. There are 27. Now that number has declined a little bit. 17th in poultry and egg production. The number of farms, 243. And there are 190 beef cattle operations. So that's sort of a lot to take in. It's a lot to process. Yeah.
What about cannabis?
Oh, he asked about the cannabis. He asked about the hemp industry. Yes, that is a very new and emerging industry in Pennsylvania. I could give a whole talk on that. It is a really fascinating sector. I will say this: farmers in, let's just say, well, Chester County and Pennsylvania, farmers don't really need much help in farming. Farmers are very good at what they do. The bigger issue is having all of the supply and production facets in place. And I would maybe say that at this point, the state of Pennsylvania, we're still trying to work through that process. So I think initially it was like, yeah, great, it's a great new industry for farmers. Again, it is, and I think it will be fabulous once we can get more of the, how do you get it processed? How do you get it? Is it for fiber? Is it for CBD? I don't have a crystal ball. I would say that in terms of the hemp market, probably the long-term longevity is more in the fiber market. If medical marijuana or marijuana were ever deregulated, it would sort of replace that entire CBD sector. So,
and it's funny that this subject has come up because this coming Tuesday night, we're having dinner with a family in Westchester, a guy who's a retired general surgeon, whose son, who is an attorney but retired, to buy a hemp farm in southern Chester County.
okay.
I think it was like 90 acres.
That's a lot.
Big
That's a lot.
operation. So
Yeah,
I'm
that's a
anxious
lot.
to hear how he's doing because this is a new venture.
Yeah, I'm going to give you my card.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that later.
Okay.
Because I'd be curious to know what market he's starting to look at, whether it would be fiber or CBD.
We had 2 years ago, we had a neighbor down the road in County Township who started a big spread of hemp last year and then just shut down again. So I don't know what happened. I don't know what the story was, but they had high hopes and again, it just didn't seem to make it.
Yes. So So it wasn't so much a question, but more of a comment about having seen hemp around the county, some particularly in the Kennett area, where then it seemed to kind of maybe go defunct and didn't really produce the next year. So hemp is really tricky, and there's a lot of rules and regulations about how hemp needs to be different than medical marijuana that's being grown, which is obviously a very separate thing. And there's a thing, it's called testing hot, where you have to make sure that within, I think it's a 10-day window, I might be wrong on the date at the time, but I think it's a 10-day window. You have that hemp tested, and it has to test under a certain level for any of those, things that would, any of those things that would make it more like for CBD and for medical marijuana than, or I shouldn't say CBD, but more like marijuana than the hemp itself. And then you have 10 days to harvest. So if the test comes back and it's too high, that crop is not good. And that can be for a variety of reasons. It could be because of drought. There's a lot of sensitivity in growing those crops. So, I think probably most of us recognize that the medical marijuana is grown indoors, it's under lock and key, but hemp is outside. So it's subject to all of the, natural conditions that other field crops would be. So things like drought, excessive heat, they can change the level in those plants. Also depending on the seed and those other things. Then another possibility is that the farmer was fine, they harvested it, they had nowhere to have it processed. So that's another issue. So the hemp industry is really, I think there's an incredible amount of potential. And here in Chester County, you can grow it. 90 acres is a lot. 90 acres is huge for hemp. I mean, you could do hemp successfully on 3, 4, 5 acres. So it depends, I guess, on what you want to do with it. But
I don't really know whether they're actually farming all 90.
Right. But even 50 would be a lot.
Right.
I will say, if any of you are also, you follow Stroud Water Research, they've been involved with some hemp trials, and actually one of the Ag Council members who is appointed by the county commissioners, as we discussed, she is involved in hemp. Now, she's not doing the literal growing. She has farmers that are growing for her, but they're working on sort of the business, production, and innovation side. And they're the ones who are doing that work with Stroud. So they're looking at whether hemp, again, grown for fiber, not for CBD, but can help with soil quality and, pulling things out of the ground that they want. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of potential for hemp. So it's really, I'm not sure how much it was captured though through Ag Census, because it was pretty new at that time. Here's just a couple farm sale figures. You can see where the 2017 numbers are in green. This is over a 15-year span. The blue is the 2002 Ag Census. So you can see that there's a lot more. Our farmers are doing well. Like they're doing, in terms of over the years, they're getting better in a stronger economy and growing and producing more. We had sort of talked about this with the 450 with mushrooms, but here's the top 10 commodity by sales. So you can see dairy is second, poultry, corn, all the way down. And more than half of our farmers are operating at a gain. That's good news. It's tough to do. Operating expenses are high, and in the current condition that we're in right now with supply chain issues and stuff, that's all increasing. So we'll see where that happens. We'll see where those numbers come out for our next Ag Census. It'll be interesting to see. So it's really hard to get county level data, economic data, sort of on the entire industry. So unless a study has been done, like an economic impact study or something specifically on a commodity, we don't always have the numbers. But in 2018, the American Mushroom Institute did a study for mushrooms nationally, but also we're able to, based on the amount of sales and growth of mushroom here, we're able to kind of extract where we are. So the total economic impact is over $1 billion on the mushroom industry, over 8,000 jobs, and it's significant.
Why do you think it's hard to get, agriculture is so important? Why is it difficult to get good data, you think?
It's hard to get it at the county level. They have good data at the state level, but it's really hard to extrapolate that at the county level. And I don't know why. In the past, the National Association for Ag Statistics, they used to do it for the county, but they had a specific grant. And then when that grant went away, they stopped getting the county data. And I said, please look for another grant, because it helps us to have that. But that's just sort of why it's not broken down that way.
Just a question, how much, I grew up in where it was kind of produce farming. How much, everything we're talking about here, is it really what you'd consider produce farming as opposed to having cows and livestock, or everything's included?
It's really all of that. And that's one of the strengths of Chester County agriculture, is the diversity of it. So there are certain counties like Adams County where everybody's growing apples. That's what they're doing. We have everything from smaller produce operations. There's poultry, there's swine, other livestock, there's mushroom, there's viticulture, silviculture, aquaculture. It's all of that. Horses, of course, equine. That's what's really interesting and significant about Chester County, I think. It's sort of this really neat amalgamation of all of these different things. And a lot of those different sort of subsectors, they assist one another. So oftentimes people will ask about like sustainable agriculture. And I use the air quotes on sustainable agriculture because generally in today's nomenclature, that's to be understood as not using a lot of chemical application. It's not necessarily organic, but it's as close to organic production as possible or whatnot. But on the other hand, you could make an argument that our subsectors of agriculture are also sustainable. So a really great example of that would be you have farmers in Chester County that are growing hay for the equine industry or the mushroom industry, because they use it in compost as well. But they're using hay for horses. And I will just say this, apparently this is again a really fascinating thing, that if you are growing that hay and you're like, well, I'm prefer to grow it for the equine industry because it's a higher valued hay because it's for feed. But if it ends up being a terrible year weather-wise and the quality of that hay is not going to work for horses, it'll still work for the mushroom industries, which is great. So they still have a place to get rid of it. The mushroom industry then uses that, and they use the spent horse bedding. I think it's the best way I can explain that. They also use that in mushroom compost. So we're going sort of from field crop to equine and mushroom. They're using that in mushroom production. Then that spent compost gets put back on fields. And if it's spread correctly and
I just want to, at one time, the mushroom growers got lots of subsidies and low interest loans. And so is that still the case for the mushroom industry? Are they getting?
I'm not aware of. Yeah, his question is about financing and low interest rate loans for the mushroom industry and a little bit of subsidy. I'm not aware so much of subsidy per se from mushroom industry. The Chester County Economic Development Council has some programs for farmers that have reduced loan rates, but that would be for any type of agricultural operation, not just mushroom. So I'm not really sure about that. But I think this idea of sustainability, part of the reason we're successful in Chester County is because different subsectors can use a waste product from another sector. And it's less expensive than for them, of course, than like bringing it all in and transporting it in, and the transportation costs and whatnot. So,
You had a slide a while ago that showed the increase in the mushroom commodity value since 2012, I think.
Mhm.
Was most of that increase due to price increases, or was most of it due to more farming?
So the question is whether the increase in the mushroom figure between the 2012 and 2017 ag census would be because of additional production or increase in price. It's more of a production. It's more production. Yeah, the margin on mushrooms is pennies, so it hasn't gone up a whole lot. Any other questions on that?
Can I ask one more?
Sure.
Think about it. I want about organic farming. My wife takes good care of me. Everything I get is organic. I think my shoes and underwear are organic. Everything's organic. And is that a category of farming? And what do you know about it?
Yes. So I was saying earlier, we don't have a whole lot. We have about 3 to 5% of our farms here in Chester County are certified organic. That's a very specific thing to be certified organic. There's a lot of paperwork and regulation and thing you have to meet, an inspection to transition land into organic. It's a 3-year process. There are many farmers in Chester County that farm, again, I'll use the word sustainably, in that they're very, very concerned about soil quality and the environment and water runoff and all of those types of things, to where they're not necessarily certified organic, but they're following as many of those practices as possible. I'll give you an example, and not all commodities are able to be grown here organically. So we have North Star Orchards, which is out off of Route 10, and they would do it organically if they could, but you can't grow apples here like that. So they use these sustainable practices, and I think it's one of those situations from a consumer perspective. You have to decide what's important to you. There are many people, for health reasons or whatever, like want everything, and your wife might be one of them, might want everything organic. And it's fabulous. And I think it's great that there's a market of products out there for people. And then there are other folks who might go, I'm okay with that, but I don't want that thing, whatever that might be. So there's a lot of, I think, market share for different types of agriculture. And I think that's also really kind of an interesting fact about our food system overall. Just kind of wrapping up these financial figures a little bit. In 2017, Farm Bureau and Duncan Allison, who I know wasn't able to be here today, but who was the chair of the Ag Council when I came on board about 15 years ago. Duncan was instrumental in getting this ag study done. It was the Chester, Delaware Farm Bureau worked with Del Valle University to do this equine study. It was a 10-county region that they looked at, and you can see the economic contribution, the 670 million, which is I think probably even an underestimate. It's hard to get survey data sometimes from folks. Even through the ag census, it's hard to get the data. Okay, so we had talked a little bit about this before. this idea of sense of place. And this goes back to this question about preserved land and what is that in the county. So the Chester County Planning Commission does an open space figure annually. They track how much of the county is preserved and a breakout of what that is. They have a great website. It's chescoplanning.org. If you ever want to go on and poke around, they have a lot of great maps, a lot of great tools to kind of look at if you have an interest in some of these areas. So we're at almost 30% of land preserved in the county. The tricky thing is, I mentioned earlier that about a third of the county was farmland. Those are not necessarily synonymous. It's not the same acres necessarily. I think that's important to recognize. So again, this 29.7%, it includes homeowners association land, it's trails, it's parks, it's game land. It's not just agricultural land. It could be passive, walking trails. It's land that's not just preserved by the county. It's preserved by municipalities, land trusts as well. And then again, private landowners who put their land in preservation. So it's kind of an amalgamation of all of those factors, but it's a significant chunk. So technology and innovation. So this is a wharf of mushroom compost. This is at Laurel Valley, which is in New Garden Township. I'm not sure if you've ever seen steaming compost before, but this is what it looks like. When people say mushrooms smell, the actual growing of mushrooms does not smell. Odor tends to come more from the composting. But the mushroom industry is a really good example of, over the last 15, 20 years, really trying to implement new technologies to bring down odor. Even if somebody might say, well, the mushroom industry was here before all these subdivisions, the reality is there's still people living near mushroom compost, right? And it smells. So how do you balance that? And I think that's an issue that municipalities deal with, farmers deal with. So again, the mushroom industry specifically has spent a lot of time and dollars on trying to move technologies forward and advance them. Do you have a question?
I just had a thought. Are vineyards a separate entity? Vineyards, or is this part of it also?
It's also part of it. So the question was, are vineyards also considered part of this agricultural landscape? And the answer is yes, it's the viticulture. Now, you'll have places where it's more of just a tasting room. And they may be making wine, but not necessarily growing the grapes. It's a little different. So the agricultural aspect of it is the grape growing, not necessarily the winemaking. But we have a lot of, I think we have 3 or 4 wineries in the county that grow 100% of their own grapes. And then a lot of them also grow a portion of their own grapes, but maybe have to bring some in.
Doesn't composting produce a lot of methane?
It does. It does. And so part of that aeration that they try to use is to help disperse some of that and keep the odors down. It's part of that. Yeah, it is part of that anaerobic process. Yeah.
Can I have a couple questions? This is very good. You know your stuff. This is good. 2 questions. I grew, what amount of this is what I call the family farm versus the business farm, if you know what I mean?
That's a really good question. I actually love this question. Even nationally, about 95 to 97% of farms are family owned.
Is that right?
Now, I'm putting on my legal hat here for a second.
Yeah, those.
Yeah, I do want to clarify though, that the holding of the company may be in an LLC. for private protection or, you know, liability issues and that kind of thing. So you can look at it as, well, that's a corporation, but that corporation is made up of a family. And I won't tell you it's 100% here in Chester County, but it's high 90s, 98, 99% are family owned in Chester County.
Is that a classic family as we think of, or is that a really, 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 really wealthy family? I mean, you know, to what extent does it stop being what I grew up as a family farm and a major, major business?
So I guess that would be one of those things of scale, right? And how you would define that. So let's stick with mushroom for a minute because they're a big producers. So you might have a farm like Phillips, but it's a big producer. Georgie, they're a big producer, but they're still family run. So
Right.
I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Well, yeah, there is no, but that's what I'm looking for. It's kind of nuanced, but it's and one more thing. Growing up, I had a lot of friends whose family were farmers, and the issue was, do they leave home and like I didn't go out, or do they stay home and farm and go on farming? And there was some of both. I didn't farm exactly, but a lot of my friends were. To what extent is it reasonable these days or doable for people to grow up in a farm and go on, and can they make a good living?
It's a really, really tough. These are great questions. I love this question as well. Farm transition is one of the trickiest things that happens. So you gave a scenario where you have a farm family, maybe there's 3 or 4 kids. None of the kids want to be in farming, right? They all want to leave the farm and go do something. So what do? What happens to the farm then?
Yeah.
Do you find someone who will take it over as is, or you know, do you have a farm manager or somebody you can sell it to? Another scenario is 2 of those children are interested in the farm. Now what?
Yeah.
Who's going to run it? How does that work? What happens to the 2 who don't want to run it and still want some kind of farm equity? Is there a buyout? Can the family afford that buyout? There's a ton of issues that surround farm transition, and that is it's a really tough thing. And you know, I know there are a lot of different organizations out there that offer like farm transition programs for families to at least start having that conversation. Because if the primary asset is the land and the land value, how do you make that more equitable for either the children that don't want to stay, or you divide it? Now, can farming be, you know, I say this as well. If you think of any family business, have you ever heard a scenario where the primary folks who are running that business leave and retire, and then the kids just step in? No, they've been grooming and working their way through those organizations for years. And it's really the same with farming. So the issue is, how do you have farming operations that are economically viable enough to support multi-generations? And that's really tricky. And that's sometimes where you end up with, okay, let's use dairy. So you have the let's say the traditional mom and dad have the dairy, and one of the daughters wants to stay in the business. Well, what's she going to do for the dairy? It's already being done. What she might do is start making cheese, some kind of value add product, or open a creamery for ice cream, another value add type product, to where then there's essentially 2 businesses that are happening on that property. So it's almost like income from 2 sources, because the initial dairy operation alone isn't going to support that next generation. Then it gets a little trickier. Well, is that going to be allowed through municipal zoning? And from the regulatory side, can you have a creamery? Well, you probably don't want to sell ice cream if people can't come to you, right? That's a little trickier. Maybe cheese, if you make cheese, you can go out and sell it at different markets. There's a lot of factors that go into all of these things. So it's a really interesting question about succession and farm transition. So, did I answer your question on that?
Yeah. Good.
In the old days, the mushroom growers got trainloads of manure from the stables in Philadelphia. Obviously, there's no stables in Philly anymore. Where do they get the compost these days?
They get a lot of it locally, but they do get some from New Jersey. They get some from Maryland and transport it in. But again, that's generally going to the composters. So there are still mushroom families, growers, who are making their own compost. Maybe they have a wharf to do that in the back of one of their mushroom houses. Well, this slide right here, like I said, this is at Laurel Valley. So Laurel Valley only produces mushroom compost, not mushrooms. Different growers own this business collectively and pull compost from it. So that's how that sort of collaboration works for the compost side for a lot of different growers. So they're not all making their own, if that makes sense. Okay, so this is inside packing mushrooms. And I love this slide. And if Duncan were here, I would absolutely say this because I didn't put in a slide or a picture because I know copyright would be an issue. But how many of you remember those old Richard Scarry books? I used to read them when I was a kid, right? And it's like a little pig on a little red tractor.
Right.
This notion, I think, of what a lot of people have about agriculture. And Duncan and I used to joke about that a lot. It's if you see that antique tractor, and I'm not sure what circa that is, so don't ask me, but you know, that's how it used to be done. When you look at modern day equipment, you get the sense of the difference, again, going back to the technology and innovation, the scale of this equipment, you've seen it moving on the roads, that's tricky too. Those pieces of machinery are $250,000, $300,000, $350,000. I mean, it's a huge investment. So do all farmers who do field crops try to own that equipment? Do they share it? How do you share it? If you all want to harvest on the same day. You know, I mean, there's a lot to this that these folks work out, and it's pretty amazing. But I do love that slide just because I think it gives you a good sense of the scale. So this is my little video moving on to the who's farming in Chester County. Ted may need to help me. I'm going to try and see if it works in the PowerPoint. And if not, we're going to flip out and see if we can get the video to show in another format. But I do think it's fun to see. Does anyone know who this is or where this is?
No.
Bob Lang, and it's Sugartown Strawberries in Malvern. He's a township supervisor. He grows a lot of things, but he also grows these sunflowers that are people go crazy for. So, okay, I'm going to see if it works.
Let's see.
Uh-oh.
No. Let us pull up. It's trying to find it. Oh,
Okay.
stop. Share.
Farmer and a grape grower in Avondale, Pennsylvania, New Garden Township, Chester County.
Hi, I'm Gary Westlake, owner-operator at Westlake Tree Farms. We are a third-generation nursery grower specializing in Christmas trees, and we also do some forest products. We're in 3 different townships: North Coventry, Warwick, and Honeybrook Township, all in the northern tier of the county.
Hi, we're Deirdre and Trey Fleming. We operate Two Gander Farm, which is a 10-acre vegetable produce farm in East Brandywine.
We're first-generation farmers operating here in the township.
Hi, my name is Megan Klotzbach. I'm a 6th-generation family member here at Mother Earth Organic Mushrooms, and we're located in London Grove Township.
Hi, welcome to Milky Way Farm, home to the Matthews family, 3rd and 4th generations, located here in Euclid Township.
Hi, I'm Mark Brault, and I'm the owner and operator at Deer Creek Malthouse. We're the first commercial malting operation in Pennsylvania, and we're located in Westtown Township in Chester County.
I'm Don Cairns from Cairns Family Farm in Salisbury Township, Chester County, and we have a crop farming operation. We farm land in 15 different townships in Chester County.
I'm Mary Hazard. This is Lanefield Farm in East Marlborough Township, Chester County, Pennsylvania. And here we breed horses, and this is King Tut right here. His name is Mystic Replica. He's responsible for all the babies that are born here. And this is what we do. We raise hay, corn, and horses.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Bell. I'm a township supervisor in West Nottingham Township, down here in southern Chester County. I live and operate an Angus operation called B&R Angus with my husband and my children. We sell freezer beef. My children show animals through the 4-H and FFA programs, and we also sell calves for club marketing. I also wanted to let you know, as a township supervisor, if you guys ever have any questions about agriculture. I grew up on a farm. I know agriculture. I'm a resource, and there's other resources, other township supervisors that are also aware of agriculture issues, and we would be glad to connect. So feel free to reach out to Hillary, and we can get connected and see if we can help out with any questions and concerns you have about agriculture in Chester County.
Did any of you know any of them?
At the Bailey Farm.
Yeah.
The Milky Way.
You know Milky Way? They do have very delicious ice cream, I will say.
It's interesting, there's a number of women as well as a number of men that spoke up there. It's both, that's good. Let me ask you something, I won't keep talking, but let me ask you something else. One of the things you run into, like in our case, I grew up and it was like it was my grandpa, it was maybe 120 acres, something like that. And he was actually college educated, but he farmed, but it was produce farming. And I grew up squash and pumpkins and sweet corn and that sort of thing. But I kind of diddled around with that. But the thing you run into is a situation where people are not going to go on farming, so they sell the farmland and people build homes on it and so on. And they're considered bad people because they sell the land and so on, and it's no longer farmland. Then people move in and they love it, but then they want to shut the door behind them and say, well, now we're in, but nobody else can come in. Now we want everything to be green. In other words, that transition is complicated, I think. Do you have any comments on that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the scenario you described is very accurate, and I also think it's very complicated. You know, when we think of agriculture, there's a couple points I guess I'd like to make. First of all, it's part of our heritage, right? I mean, it's what was here before IT and healthcare and all of these other industries, right? It's what was here. It's what we knew, I think, more instinctually as individuals. Our families were either involved with farming or not, but we were very much closer tied to agriculture and understood it better. Don't quote me on this, my numbers might be a little wrong, but I want to say back in like the 1950s, 1960s, it was roughly like one farmer fed about 50 people. And today it's like one farmer feeds about 250 people. People just aren't as aware of what it is. So there's this notion sometimes that we want to move to Chester County or someplace where there's agriculture because it's bucolic. I mean, it's beautiful. It's rolling hills and an occasional silo on the horizon, right? That's not what agriculture is. It's a working industry. It's a working land use.
A lot of capital.
Well, it's a lot of capital, but there's also smells, odors, noise,
Yeah.
and can disrupt a neighboring non-agricultural or residential population. So it's important to really sort of try to buffer and have those two land uses not right up against each other. But it's happening. It's still happening. We've talked a lot about the mushroom industry in Kennett. Well, they're building brand new townhomes right next to a mushroom farm, and they're not inexpensive. Do the folks who are going to move in there recognize that they're right next to a mushroom farm?
Maybe that's their problem. They do.
Well, it is until they move in, and then it becomes the mushroom farmer's problem. And that's sort of that issue of like neighbor relations and all of those things. But I think some of that's just municipalities try to do good land use planning and put in some buffers so those residential uses aren't right up against.
But how could these people not know? I mean, if they can dress themselves in the morning, they should be able to know there's something happening there, you know? I just don't get that.
I will leave that unanswered. I will leave that one unanswered. But yes, I mean, I think though you have to also be kind of tuned in to what agriculture can look like. And people don't always know what that is. And maybe they're more occupied about whether the school district is good or, whether it's near a facility for their aging parents or something like that, where they're just not really looking at what else is around them. They just want to know if there's good schools, if there's a library, if they're near a gym or whatever other amenities they want. The interesting thing about agriculture is, of course, it's very land focused. So we've talked about acreage and we've talked about land preservation and all of those things. But I will say this, it's important to remember and recognize that as much as we want to preserve land, it's this notion of let's hold on to what we have. But the industry itself is always moving, it's always changing. So there are a lot of different types of operations that can be done on smaller acreage. You don't need 80 to 100 acres. You do for certain types of operations, but you don't need that much for produce. As Deirdre mentioned in the video, they're working off of 10 acres. Now they lease from the Brandywine Conservancy in Downingtown. There's a farm, the Miller Farm, where they lease. I think they're growing on 6 of it. Anthony Vietri from Vala Vineyards, who was the first one in the video. I'm not sure if you could hear all of it, but I think his total parcel is maybe 15 acres and he's growing on about 7 acres.
Wow.
It's a very different model than a 100-acre dairy farm. So there's room for the industry to continue to grow, even though it feels like we're losing farmland and we're losing these big tracts. There's indoor growing, whether it's hydroponic. There's all different types of hemp we were talking about earlier. You don't need a lot of acreage for hemp. So it's really interesting to kind of see what will yield.
Let me ask you something. That I find interesting. You said they have 50 or how many acres, but they farm 7. What in the world are they doing that they can raise capital? They can have the return on that capital on 7 acres.
So he makes wine. So he's
Well,
growing grapes on about 7 acres. Then there's a production room and there's a tasting facility and whatnot, and where you can purchase wine. So that's a model that's working for them. I don't know. I'm not going to ask their, how that financially works for them because that's,
No,
but it must work because that's what they're doing. And they've been successful at it for, the last 20 years. We get questions and calls a lot about what farmers should do. People have interesting notions about what farmers should do. I will say very clearly, the county supports all types of agriculture, scale, scope of agriculture, whether it's organic or not, or whether it's GMO or not. It's not really the government's role to have a say in that. We are there to support farmers however we can, and they'll make the business decisions that they need to for their own operations, for whatever their reasons are. There's a lot of conservation work that's done in the county. I had mentioned Stroud earlier, but there's a lot of conservation organizations out there, and Chester County is a conservation district that works one-on-one with farmers to implement best management practices and all that kind of stuff from the environmental side. So it's a really complicated, let's say, recipe for industry, but I think a lot of things are today. Did you have a question?
Yes, can you discuss for a minute government assistance to farmers, like for example, assistance for not growing crops and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I will give you a very high level discussion on that. It's not something that we are too involved with, so it's not like my area of expertise, but any of those subsidies are coming from the federal government. They're coming through USDA. They do not apply to all types of agriculture. It's mostly, field crops and that kind of thing. My understanding is that we don't grow the amount of acreage here where anybody's really being paid to not grow. That's more of a Midwestern situation. But, there's insurance and crop insurance and that kind of stuff, but that's all done at the federal level. Our local FSA office is out near Valley Township, right off of the 35 Pass. So that's where the federal agencies are, NRCS and FSA. So farmers would go out there, I guess, and work with them. But we don't have, they do receive some money, but not, I believe, not to grow.
Well, what amount do you think of your farmers have college educations?
That's a good question.
Just a guess. Just what? Because again,
I don't know, and I would hesitate to guess on that. I can look into that and let Craig know, and he can let you all know the answer to that question.
One thing, it's a technical industry more than people realize.
It is. It is highly technical, and a lot of them do have a college education, and I know a lot of the new and beginning farmers have a college education. So
Not the Amish.
Not the Amish. Yeah. So
we've also got a lot of support in terms of scientific development and stuff at Penn State. They put a lot into mushroom
absolutely
growing technology.
Absolutely. So Penn State University, as the land grant college for Pennsylvania, has they have their entire school of agriculture where they're doing tons of research and amazing work, but they also have the extension service. And there's an extension office at my building, which is right on Westtown Road. So there is a Chester County Penn State Cooperative Extension, and they're there to help farmers in all sorts of things. They do a lot of trainings. They will come out and work with them one-on-one. Yeah, they're a tremendous resource. That's the last thing I have really is sort of how we can all continue to support local ag. We produce a farm products guide annually. And this is just that map. This is the map that sort of I mentioned earlier when Craig and I were first talking. I show you this map. This is about 125 farms. This is not representative of the ag in Chester County. I just want to be clear about that. We have a lot more farms than these. The reason I like to show this map is the geographic representation of where agriculture is and is happening, and where you can find specific products. This is available on our website, which is chescofarming.org. And it's a full magazine, I guess you could call it. So we do feature articles on farmers to kind of help people, again, introduce them to who's farming here in Chester County. And then we have the map, but we have probably 10 to 12 pages of listings of where you can find all sorts of products. So it's everything that's listed on here. It's meat, eggs, dairy, honey, flowers, wineries, mushrooms, all of those things, Christmas trees. So
how does CSAs play into this?
CSAs are one of the sort of business models that produce farmers use. There's a lot of benefit to it because they receive capital up front. Are you guys familiar with the CSA or not so much? Okay, so CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And what that business model is a farmer is produce usually, or fruit and vegetable, and they will say, you give me money up front and you will get a share of the harvest, and you'll get it throughout the season. So CSA farms might have you come to the farm to pick up your share weekly. Some of them do off-site pickup. I can't think of which farm it was, but I know the Chester County Food Bank was a pickup site for one of the farms, and has been for a couple of years. So if people can't get, to the western part of the county as easily, they can pick it up at the food bank. And basically it's this model where it helps new and beginning farmers who don't have a lot of money, who don't necessarily qualify for a lot of capital, in terms of financing and bank loans and stuff, to get an influx of cash to buy the products they need and equipment. And then they might have 200, 300 members of that CSA, and those folks come weekly or every other week, however they have it set up, to the farm. It can be a really great model.
Do you know how many there are?
I want to say we have 10 or 11 CSAs. And if you go onto the Chesco Farming website and look in the farm guide, there's a list of all of the CSAs, where they are located, how they work, and that kind of thing. So,
how do people deal? I remember driving down the road with a wagon behind me when I was, doing stuff when I was younger. Nowadays, around here, everybody in Chester County likes to eat, but a lot of people aren't really very patient. How do they deal with that situation on the roads? I mean, the Amish are an example of people, but I mean, otherwise, just dealing with people in the community, you're just trying to run your business, but is that a problem?
it is a problem. I mean, farm equipment's large, as we discussed earlier, and if you're trying to move it on the road, you're clearly blocking traffic, and it's moving very slowly. It can be dangerous for people operating that machinery, as well as resident citizens, if they're trying to pass that equipment and all of that kind of stuff. We usually in the spring do a social media sort of outreach on patients and all that stuff. But it is tough. It is tough. And then certainly the Amish is another aspect of that with the buggies. But
did you grow up on a farm?
I did not grow up on a farm. I had no background in agriculture when I came into this position. So I worked with a lot of rural communities and worked from the land use perspective with agriculture, but no. So the good news for me is we don't provide technical advice or assistance to farmers, because if I tried that, things would go downhill very quickly in Chester County agriculture. But what I can do, hopefully, is run a program and identify ways that the county can support farmers. That's not, from a technical perspective, because there are other groups who are offering that perspective. So
That's okay. I didn't grow up in a chemical plant either. So, you can still make a living and stuff, right?
Right. So I just have like a couple more slides, things you can do, visit local farms and farm markets. And again, where to find them, it would be in the farm guide on our Chesco farming website. That is my son, who is now 9, but that is when we were picking strawberries at Highland Orchards. So there's a lot of things you can do. I also just want to remind everybody, most of the milk, the mushrooms, the butter, the ice cream, those dairy products that you're getting at the grocery store has local milk. It's not, you don't have to go just to a farmer's market to support Chester County agriculture. The mushrooms, it's a private labeling system that is a nightmare that would take us 15 years to figure out. But the mushrooms you see in Giant or Acme or Wegmans or whatever, they're locally grown. So it's not just at farmers markets. We may even be past time. I'm not even sure. You guys have fabulous questions and I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Good job.